The room was suffocatingly still, the air thick with the metallic tang of blood and the faint hum of a flickering fluorescent light. In the corner of a sterile Boston hospital ward, a 7-year-old boy sat cross-legged on a cot, his small hands clutching a tattered stuffed rabbit. His eyes, wide and unblinking, stared at the wall as if it held secrets no one else could see. The nurses whispered about him in hushed tones, their faces pale, their glances uneasy. They called him the Silent One, but it wasn't his silence that chilled them. It was what he'd done just hours before, a single, inexplicable act that left a doctor unconscious, a tray of surgical tools scattered across the floor, and a question no one could answer. How could a child, barely tall enough to reach the doorknob, unleash such calculated chaos? It's 1937, and in the heart of Boston's medical elite, a psychiatric case is unfolding that will defy every textbook, every expert, and every shred of reason. This is the story of Daniel Weaver, a boy whose mind seems to hold a darkness so profound it feels almost alive. Was he possessed by something beyond comprehension? Was he a prodigy of madness or something far worse? From the first moment you hear his story, you'll feel the ground shift beneath you as if the world you thought you knew is hiding a fracture just below the surface. What could drive a child to act so sinister they'd make even the hardest skeptic question the boundaries of the human mind? This case isn't just a mystery. It's a descent into a labyrinth where every turn reveals a truth more unsettling than the last. Why did Daniel's parents vanish without a trace? What did the cryptic symbols he scratched into the hospital walls mean? And why did every doctor who tried to diagnose him end up haunted by nightmares they couldn't explain? These questions will claw at you, urging you to keep watching to uncover the secret that science could never name. Because the truth about Daniel Weaver isn't just disturbing, it's a mirror that might reflect something you're not ready to see. Stories like this expose the fragility of what we believe about ourselves. They remind us that the human mind, for all its brilliance, can be a house of cards trembling at the edge of collapse. One wrong step, one hidden trigger, and everything we trust, our morality, our sanity, our safety, can unravel. Daniel's story will make you wonder, what lies dormant in the minds of those around you? Could the person closest to you be hiding a darkness you'd never suspect? Or worse, could it be hiding in you? If you're ready to step into the shadow, hit that like button to help others uncover the chilling truth behind this case. In the comments, type, "I'm ready to discover the truth about Daniel Weaver." By doing so, you're joining a community of truth seekers, those brave enough to face the stories no one else dares to tell. Thank you for being here, for daring to look where others turn away. Prepare yourself, because what comes next contains a key revelation that will forever change the way you see the human mind. The Weaver family home sat on the edge of Boston's South End, a crumbling Victorian relic dwarfed by the encroaching shadow of industrialization. It was October 1936, and the neighborhood was a patchwork of fading grandeur and factory soot, where whispers of strange happenings clung to the cobblestone streets like fog. Daniel Weaver, barely 7, lived there with his parents, Margaret and Thomas, a couple whose strained smiles barely masked a growing unease. To outsiders, they were unremarkable, a seamstress and a dock worker scraping by in a world still reeling from the Great Depression. But inside those peeling walls, something was unraveling, something no one could name. It started with small things. Margaret noticed Daniel humming a melody she'd never heard, a dissonant tune that seemed to crawl under her skin. He'd sit for hours, staring at the fireplace, whispering to his stuffed rabbit, which he called Mr. Thread. Thomas brushed it off. "Boys were odd sometimes," he said. But Margaret couldn't shake the feeling that Daniel's eyes weren't his own. They were too sharp, too knowing, as if they saw things beyond the room, beyond the present. She'd catch him standing in the hallway at night, motionless, his silhouette framed by the moonlight streaming through cracked windows. "He's just sleepwalking," Thomas insisted, but Margaret knew better. Sleepwalkers didn't smile like that. The first real sign came on a frigid evening when Margaret found Daniel in the backyard, barefoot in the frost, digging in the dirt with a kitchen knife. His hands were raw, flecked with blood, but he didn't flinch. When she asked what he was doing, he looked up, his face pale as bone, and said, "Mr. Thread says the ground wants to talk." Margaret's heart sank. She dragged him inside, locking the knife away, but that night she couldn't sleep. She swore she heard scratching beneath the floorboards, a faint, rhythmic tapping that stopped whenever she moved. Thomas dismissed it as rats, but the next morning, they found the backyard torn apart. The earth churned into jagged furrows, as if something had clawed its way out or in. Days later, the incident at the hospital sealed their fate. Daniel had been taken to Boston General for a fever that wouldn't break. The doctors, overworked and dismissive, chalked it up to influenza, but Margaret insisted something was wrong, something deeper. That night in the pediatric ward, Daniel sat up in bed, his fever gone, his eyes locked on Dr. Harold Grayson, a young resident with a reputation for arrogance. Without warning, Daniel lunged, knocking over a tray of instruments and pinning Grayson to the floor with a strength no child should possess. He didn't scream or cry, just stared, his small hands gripping the doctor's wrists, whispering words no one could make out. When the nurses finally pried him off, Grayson was shaking, his face drained of color. "He said I'd see it soon," Grayson stammered later, refusing to return to the ward. What made this moment so chilling wasn't just the violence, it was the precision. The tray hadn't fallen randomly. The instruments were arranged in a perfect circle around Grayson's head, as if Daniel had planned it. The nurses, hardened by years of grueling shifts, refused to go near him. One quit the next day, claiming she saw shadows moving in Daniel's room when no one was there. Margaret, trembling at his bedside, noticed something else. The stuffed rabbit. Mr. Thread was now missing one eye, its stitching unraveled as if someone had torn it apart with deliberate care. The hospital's head psychiatrist, Dr. Evelyn Mercer, was called in. A woman of sharp intellect and unshakable calm, she'd seen her share of troubled children, shell-shocked war orphans, victims of abuse. But Daniel was different. His silence wasn't defiance. It was a wall, impenetrable and cold. When she tried to speak to him, he drew on a piece of paper, jagged, spiraling symbols that looked like no language she'd ever seen. "Where did you learn this?" she asked. Daniel's reply was a whisper. "Mr. Thread taught me." Mercer's notes from that night, later found in the hospital archives, described a profound unease and a sense that Daniel wasn't just disturbed, he was something else entirely. Word of the incident spread, and the Weavers became pariahs. Neighbors who once nodded politely now crossed the street to avoid them. Margaret stopped going to church, unable to bear the whispers. Thomas took to drinking, his temper fraying as he grappled with a fear he couldn't voice. They tried to keep Daniel home, but the boy's behavior grew stranger. He'd vanish for hours, only to be found in the attic, surrounded by scraps of paper covered in those same cryptic symbols. Once, Margaret found a dead sparrow on the kitchen table, its wings spread wide, its eyes removed. Daniel was nowhere to be found, but Mr. Thread sat on a chair nearby, its one remaining eye glinting in the dim light. By the time the authorities got involved, the Weaver home was a pressure cooker of dread. A social worker, Clara Hensley, visited after reports of neglect surfaced. She found the house in disarray, furniture overturned, walls scratched with those same eerie symbols. Margaret was a wreck, her eyes hollow, her hands trembling as she clutched a rosary. Thomas was gone, having left for work and never returned. Daniel sat calmly in the living room, humming that same haunting melody. When Clara asked where his father was, Daniel smiled and said, "He's with the ground now." That night, Clara filed a report recommending Daniel's immediate removal to a psychiatric facility. She didn't mention the chill that ran through her when she saw Mr. Thread, now missing both eyes, perched on the mantel like a sentinel. The next morning, Margaret was gone too. The house was empty, the front door swinging open in the wind. Daniel was found sitting in the backyard, his hands caked with dirt, the stuffed rabbit at his side. When police arrived, he didn't resist, didn't speak. He just stared, his eyes carrying that same unnatural weight. The officers, hardened men used to Boston's roughest corners, felt an instinct to look away. They took him to the state asylum, a looming brick fortress on the city's outskirts where Dr. Mercer awaited. She knew this was no ordinary case. Something about Daniel Weaver suggested a mystery that science wasn't ready to unravel, a puzzle that might not have an answer. The state asylum loomed like a forgotten fortress on the outskirts of Boston, its red brick facade scarred by decades of harsh New England winters. Built in the late 1800s, it was a place where the city's unwanted were warehoused, the insane, the destitute, the inexplicable. By 1937, it had earned a grim reputation, with rumors of experimental treatments and patients who vanished into its labyrinthine halls. Dr. Evelyn Mercer, with her starched white coat and a clipboard clutched like a shield, stood at the heavy iron gates as the police escorted Daniel inside. The boy walked calmly between them, his small frame dwarfed by the officer's bulk, Mr. Thread dangling from one hand by its ear. Mercer's pulse quickened. She had read the reports, but seeing him in person sent a ripple of doubt through her resolve. The intake room was a stark chamber of white tiles and echoing footsteps, lit by harsh bulbs that cast long shadows. Daniel sat on a metal chair, his feet not quite touching the floor as Mercer began her initial assessment. "Hello, Daniel," she said, her voice steady despite the knot in her stomach. "I'm Dr. Mercer. Can you tell me why you're here?" He didn't respond, his gaze fixed on a crack in the wall. She noted his vital signs. Normal, unremarkable. But when she shone a light into his eyes, his pupils didn't contract as they should. Instead, they seemed to absorb the light, pulling it in like a void. Unsettled, she pressed on, asking about his parents. At the mention of Margaret and Thomas, Daniel's lips curved into a faint smile. "They're listening," he whispered, his voice so soft it might have been the wind. That night, as the asylum settled into its nocturnal rhythm of muffled cries and distant clangs, strange things began to happen in Ward C, where Daniel was housed. The ward was a long corridor of locked cells, each occupied by patients in various states of distress. Nurse Lydia Grant, a veteran of 20 years, was on duty. She patrolled the halls with a flashlight, her keys jingling like a warning. Around midnight, she heard it, a low scratching like nails on stone coming from Daniel's cell. Peering through the observation slit, she saw him asleep, or so it seemed, but the sound persisted. It moved, traveling along the wall as if something was burrowing through the masonry. Lydia backed away, her breath catching, and by morning, the wall bore fresh gouges, symbols etched deep into the plaster, the same cryptic spirals Daniel had drawn before. Word spread among the staff like a contagion. Orderly James Harlan, a burly man with a tattooed arm from his Navy days, laughed it off at first. "Kid's just got an imaginary friend," he said during breakfast in the staff lounge. But that afternoon, while delivering Daniel's meal, Harlan felt a chill. The boy was sitting cross-legged on the floor, Mr. Thread in his lap, its fabric now frayed and stained. As Harlan set down the tray, Daniel looked up and said, "You dream of the sea, don't you? But the waves whisper names you forgot." Harlan froze. No one knew about his nightmares, the ones where drowned sailors called to him from the depths. He left the cell shaking, and that night he requested a transfer, claiming illness. Dr. Mercer delved deeper, scheduling daily sessions in her office, a cluttered space filled with leather-bound tomes on psychoanalysis and framed diplomas from Harvard. She tried hypnosis, but Daniel resisted, his mind a fortress. Instead, she observed him through a one-way mirror in the playroom, where children were allowed supervised time. Other kids avoided him, clustering in corners while Daniel built structures from blocks. Not towers or houses, but intricate mazes that seemed to defy geometry. One girl, Sarah, a 10-year-old with selective mutism, approached once. Daniel handed her a block, and for a moment she smiled. But later Sarah began screaming about voices in the walls and had to be sedated. Mercer noted in her journal, "The boy's influence is pervasive, almost infectious. Is it suggestion or something more?" As days turned to weeks, the asylum's atmosphere thickened with unease. Lights flickered in Daniel's ward without cause, bulbs bursting in showers of glass. Patients in adjacent cells reported dreams of a thread man, a shadowy figure that unraveled their thoughts. One man, a schizophrenic named Victor, clawed at his arms, insisting threads were growing under his skin. Mercer examined him. There were no marks, but Victor's terror was real. She began to question her own sanity when, late one evening, she found a note on her desk, a scrap of paper with those symbols, and below them, in childish scrawl, "The ground remembers." Her office door had been locked. No one could have entered. Desperate for answers, Mercer reached out to colleagues. She contacted Dr. Elias Thorne, a renowned psychiatrist from New York, known for his work on dissociative disorders. Thorne arrived by train, his suitcase packed with case files and skepticism. Together they interviewed Daniel, who sat impassively as Thorne probed. "Tell me about Mr. Thread," Thorne said. Daniel tilted his head. "He's the keeper of secrets. He knows what you did to your sister." Thorne paled. His sister had died young, an accident he'd never spoken of, one that haunted him with guilt. The session ended abruptly. Thorne excusing himself to the bathroom where he vomited. "This isn't psychology," he told Mercer later over whiskey in her office. "This is something else. Get him out of here before it spreads," but it was too late. That night a fire alarm blared, though no smoke was found. In the chaos, Nurse Grant discovered Victor hanging from his bedsheet, his body twisted unnaturally. Scratched into the wall above him, more symbols. The police ruled it suicide, but Mercer knew better. She began sleeping at the asylum, her dreams plagued by visions of unraveling threads pulling at the edges of reality. Daniel, meanwhile, remained serene, his cell now adorned with drawings that seemed to shift when unobserved. The staff whispered of a curse of a child who wasn't a child, but a vessel for something ancient and hungry. Mercer's obsession grew. She pored over old texts, seeking patterns in the symbols. They resembled nothing in known linguistics. Not runes, not hieroglyphs, but evoked a primal dread. One book, a dusty volume on occult folklore, mentioned thread entities, beings that wove fates and unraveled minds. She dismissed it as superstition, yet couldn't shake the connection. When she confronted Daniel, showing him the book, he laughed, a sound like cracking ice. "Mr. Thread likes stories," he said, "but the real one is underground, waiting." The turning point came during a storm that rattled the asylum's windows. Lightning illuminated the halls as Mercer made her rounds. In Daniel's cell, she found him standing, facing the wall, his hand tracing invisible lines. The air hummed with static, and for a moment she saw it, shadows coiling like threads wrapping around the boy. "What are you?" she whispered. Daniel turned, his eyes black as ink. "I'm the diagnosis you can't make." The lights went out, plunging the ward into darkness, and in that void Mercer felt fingers, cold, fibrous as brush her skin. When power returned, Daniel was asleep, but Mercer was changed. She locked herself in her office, scribbling notes frantically. The asylum, once a bastion of science, now felt like a trap, its walls closing in. "And Daniel?" He hummed his melody, the sound echoing through the vents, seeping into every corner, as if the building itself was awakening to his call. The blackout lasted only moments, but to Dr. Evelyn Mercer it felt like an eternity trapped in a web of invisible strands. When the lights flickered back on, casting their harsh glow over the ward, Daniel was curled up on his cot, his breathing even, as if nothing had happened. Mercer stumbled back, her skin prickling where those phantom fingers had touched her. She fled to her office, barring the door with a chair, her mind racing through explanations, hallucinations from fatigue perhaps, or a trick of the storm. But deep down she knew it was no illusion. The asylum, once a sanctuary of reason, was now a stage for something inexplicable, and Daniel Weaver was its enigmatic director. In the days that followed, Mercer threw herself into research with a fervor that bordered on mania. She scoured the asylum's archives, dusty tomes stacked in the basement amid forgotten patient files and rusted equipment. The air down there was thick with mildew, the only light from a single bulb swaying overhead. Among the yellowed pages she found echoes of similar cases, children who spoke in tongues, who predicted deaths, who left symbols that drove men mad. One file from 1892 described a girl in Salem who whispered secrets that unraveled families. She was burned as a witch, her ashes scattered. Another from 1910 detailed a boy in Chicago whose imaginary friend led to a string of suicides. Mercer noted the patterns, the symbols, the whispers, the unraveling. "It's not new," she murmured to herself, her voice echoing off the concrete walls. "It's ancient." Emboldened, she confronted Daniel again, this time with a recorder and a Bible, grasping at any tool that might pierce his veil. The session room was sparse, a table, 2 chairs, a window barred against the world. Daniel sat across from her, Mr. Thread in his lap, its fabric now threadbare, strands hanging loose like veins. "Tell me about the ground," Mercer said, her voice firm. Daniel's eyes met hers, and for the first time she saw a flicker, amusement, pity. "The ground is where they sleep," he replied, his small fingers picking at the rabbit seams. "Mr. Thread wakes them. He weaves the dreams." As he spoke, the room grew colder, the window frosting over despite the summer heat outside. Mercer pressed, "Who are they?" Daniel leaned forward, his breath misting the air. "The forgotten, the ones science buried." That night, the asylum's patients erupted in chaos. In Ward B, an elderly woman with dementia began scratching symbols into her arms, blood welling up in precise lines. In Ward D, a veteran screamed about threads pulling him under. Mercer was called from her restless sleep, arriving to find the staff overwhelmed, sedatives running low. Nurse Grant, her face etched with exhaustion, pulled Mercer aside. "It's him," she whispered. "The boy. We need to isolate him further." But isolation proved futile. Even in solitary, Daniel's influence seeped through. Guards reported hearing humming in empty halls, finding threads, actual silk-like strands coiled in corners. One orderly, young and skeptical, laughed it off until he found a thread woven into his shoelace. That night he dreamed of being unraveled, waking with scratches on his chest. Mercer decided to trace Daniel's origins, hoping family history might unlock the mystery. She drove to the Weaver home, the address pulled from police reports. The house stood abandoned, its windows boarded, vines creeping like fingers over the facade. The neighborhood was quiet, too quiet, as if the residents held their breath. Forcing the door, Mercer stepped into a tomb of dust and shadows. The air was stale, carrying a faint rot. In the living room, furniture was overturned, walls marred with symbols that now seemed to pulse in the dim light. Upstairs in Daniel's room, she found drawings, hundreds of them pinned to every surface, depicting twisted figures emerging from the earth, threads connecting them like a web. In the basement, the true horror awaited. The floor was dirt, uneven, as if recently disturbed. Mercer dug with a rusted shovel she found leaning against the wall, her hands blistering, sweat mixing with tears. At 2 feet down, she hit something soft. Brushing away the soil, she uncovered a hand, Thomas Weaver's, his face contorted in eternal scream, threads of root or something finer wrapped around his throat. Nearby, Margaret's body, similarly entwined, her eyes wide open, staring accusingly. Mercer retched, the shovel clattering to the ground. How had Daniel, a child, done this, and why? Stumbling out, she notified the police anonymously, fearing implication. The investigation would later rule it a murder-suicide, but Mercer knew better. Back at the asylum, she shared her findings with Dr. Thorne, who had returned despite his fears. They met in the garden, away from prying ears, the summer sun mocking their dread. "He's not human," Thorne said, his voice trembling. "Or if he is, he's a mutation, a psychiatric anomaly." Mercer shook her head. "It's more. The symbols, I've decoded some. They're a language ancient, predating Sumerian. They speak of weavers, entities that possess the young, feeding on chaos." Thorne scoffed, but his eyes betrayed belief. Together they planned an exorcism of sorts, a blend of science and superstition. Electroshock mixed with incantations from forbidden books. The procedure took place in the asylum's chapel, long disused, its pews covered in dust. Daniel was strapped to a gurney, electrodes on his temples, Mr. Thread confiscated and locked away. As the machine hummed to life, Daniel smiled. "You can't unwind what's woven," he said. The shock hit his body arching, but instead of cries, laughter echoed. The lights dimmed, shadows lengthening into threads that snaked across the floor. Thorne screamed as one wrapped his ankle, pulling him down. Mercer cut the power, but too late. Thorne was gone, vanished into the floor as if swallowed. The chapel door burst open, staff rushing in, but Daniel was calm, the restraints loose. Panic gripped the asylum. Patients rioted, breaking free, their madness amplified. Mercer locked herself in her office, poring over notes, seeking a weakness. She realized Mr. Thread was key, the conduit. Sneaking to the storage room, she found the rabbit, its eyes now replaced with buttons that seemed to watch her. As she prepared to burn it, a whisper stopped her. "Destroy me and he unravels everything." Her hand hesitated, the match flickering. By dawn, the asylum was a war zone. Bodies littered the halls, staff, patients entwined in threads that weren't there before. Daniel walked free, humming, the symbols now carved into every wall. Mercer confronted him in the courtyard, the sun rising like a judgment. "What do you want?" she pleaded. Daniel tilted his head. "To show you the truth. Science is the real monster, burying what it can't explain." As threads coiled around her, Mercer felt her mind fraying, memories unwinding like spools. In that moment, she understood. Daniel wasn't the patient. The world was. And the diagnosis? Incurable. As the first rays of dawn pierced the asylum's courtyard, painting the stone walls in hues of blood and gold, Dr. Evelyn Mercer stood frozen. The threads, ethereal yet tangible, coiling around her wrists like living restraints. Her mind, once a bastion of logical inquiry, now teetered on the brink of fragmentation. memories slipping away like sand through fingers. Daniel Weaver watched her with those bottomless eyes, his small form casting an impossibly long shadow that seemed to writhe independently. "You see it now," he said, his voice a gentle murmur that carried the weight of ancient echoes. "The web that binds us all. Science cuts threads, but Mr. Thread mends them," Mercer gasped, pulling back, the sensations fading as quickly as they had come, leaving her doubting her sanity once more. The courtyard, usually a place of supervised respite for patients, was now a scene of desolation. Overturned benches lay scattered, and in the distance sirens wailed as authorities responded to the night's pandemonium. Bodies of staff and inmates dotted the grounds, not from violence but from a profound catatonia, eyes open, staring at nothing, mouths agape in silent screams. Mercer staggered away from Daniel, who remained seated on a stone bench. Humming his dissonant tune, she fled to the main building, her footsteps echoing through empty corridors where papers fluttered like ghosts in the breeze from shattered windows. The asylum had become a husk, its inhabitants unraveled by an unseen force. In her office, Mercer collapsed into her chair, her desk a chaos of notes and artifacts. The forbidden book on occult folklore lay open, its pages yellowed and brittle, describing weavers as primordial beings that inhabited the spaces between realities, using hosts to spin chaos into the world. She had dismissed it as myth, but now, with Thorn vanished and the dead entwined in impossible threads, doubt gnawed at her. Grabbing the matchbox, she resolved to destroy Mr. Thread, the apparent talisman. Sneaking back to the storage room, the rabbit sat innocently on a shelf, its button eyes gleaming mockingly. As she struck the match, a whisper filled the room. "Burn me," and the web tightens. Her hand trembled, the flame licking the fabric. But instead of burning, the rabbit writhed, threads exploding outward, wrapping around her arms, pulling her into a vision. Suddenly, Mercer was no longer in the asylum. She found herself in a vast underground cavern, the air damp and echoing with distant drips, roots and vines twisted like veins across the walls, pulsing with an inner light. At the center, a colossal figure loomed, a being made of infinite threads, weaving and unweaving realities with deft, spider-like appendages. "You seek to diagnose," it intoned, its voice a chorus of whispers. "But I am the ailment and the cure." Visions assaulted her, ancient civilizations crumbling under madness, children throughout history serving as vessels, their minds portals for this entity. She saw Daniel's parents not murdered by the boy, but drawn into the ground by threads that promised forbidden knowledge, their bodies preserved in earthen cocoons, minds alive in eternal torment, snapping back to reality. Mercer dropped the rabbit, the flames extinguished without harm. Gasping, she realized the truth. Daniel wasn't possessed. He was a conduit, chosen for his innocence, his mind a perfect loom for the weaver's designs. The symbols weren't gibberish, they were instructions, a language of entropy, designed to fray the fabric of perception. She needed help, someone outside the scientific paradigm. Recalling a contact from her university days, Father Ignatius Riley, a Jesuit priest with a penchant for the esoteric, she penned a frantic letter, sealing it with trembling hands. But as she left to post it, she found the asylum gates locked, threads woven through the iron bars, invisible yet unbreakable. Meanwhile, Daniel roamed the halls unchecked, his presence amplifying the chaos. In the infirmary, a nurse who had survived the night approached him, drawn by an inexplicable compulsion. "What are you?" she asked, echoing Mercer's earlier plea. Daniel handed her a loose thread from Mr. Thread. "Pull it," he said. She did, and her world unraveled, memories of her life flashing before her, then dissolving into nothingness. She collapsed, joining the catatonic ranks. Patients who had once been violent now sat in circles, scratching symbols into the floor. Their actions synchronized like a ritual. The air hummed with their collective murmurs, a chant that vibrated through the building's foundations. Mercer, evading the growing web, hid in the basement archives, poring over more files. She discovered a pattern. Every few decades, a child like Daniel appeared in Boston's history, always in times of societal upheaval, always leaving a trail of madness. In 1872, during the Great Fire, a girl named Eliza had predicted the blaze, her dolls coming alive in witnesses' nightmares. In 1919, amid the influenza pandemic, a boy called Samuel whispered cures that drove doctors insane. Each case ended with the child's disappearance, the asylum records sealed or destroyed. "It's cyclical," Mercer whispered, her breath fogging the cold air. The Weaver feeds on fear, emerging when humanity is weakest. Determined to break the cycle, she crafted a plan. Using chemicals from the lab, she mixed a sedative potent enough to subdue Daniel, hoping to sever his connection. Armed with a syringe, she crept through the shadows, the building now alive with whispers. Walls seemed to breathe, floors undulating like waves. She found Daniel in the chapel, standing before the altar where Thorne had vanished. The floor there was cracked, threads emerging like roots. "It's time," Daniel said, turning to her. "Join the weave." Mercer lunged, needle poised, but threads shot up, ensnaring her legs. She fell, the syringe skittering away. In that moment of desperation, a memory surfaced. Her own childhood, a forgotten incident where she had seen shadows in her room, whispering secrets. Had she been chosen once but resisted? The thought fueled her, and she grabbed the syringe, plunging it into Daniel's arm. He gasped, his eyes widening, the threads slackening. For a brief instant, the boy looked truly childlike, scared. "Help me," he whispered before collapsing. The asylum fell silent, the humming ceasing, patients stirring from their stupors. But as Mercer caught her breath, a low rumble echoed from below. The ground trembled, cracked spiderwebbing across the floor. Threads erupted anew, thicker, angrier. Daniel stirred, his voice not his own. "You can't cut the source." The chapel doors slammed shut, trapping her. Visions assaulted her again. The Weaver rising, its form expanding, ready to consume the city. Boston above, oblivious, would soon feel the pull, minds fraying one by one. Mercer realized her error. The sedative had only angered the entity, accelerating its emergence. She clawed at the doors, screams echoing, but the web tightened, drawing her deeper into the unraveling. The chapel floor buckled under the force of the rumble, cracks widening like gaping wounds in the earth, exhaling a fetid breath of damp soil and decay. Dr. Evelyn Mercer scrambled backward, her back pressing against the heavy oak doors that refused to yield, sealed by an invisible force. Threads erupted from the fissures, thick and pulsating, coiling through the air like serpents awakened from slumber. Daniel Weaver lay on the altar, his body limp from the sedative, but his eyes, those abyssal pools, fluttered open, reflecting not pain or fear but a triumphant gleam. The air thickened with a low, resonant hum, vibrating through Mercer's bones as if the asylum itself was groaning in agony or ecstasy. "You've awakened it fully," Daniel murmured, his voice layered with echoes that weren't his own, reverberating from the walls, the floor, the very threads that now danced around them. Mercer's mind raced, piecing together fragments from her visions and research. The Weaver wasn't content with subtle influences anymore. Her interference had provoked a full manifestation. Dust sifted from the ceiling as the tremors intensified, pews splintering with sharp cracks that echoed like gunfire. Outside, she could hear distant shouts, surviving staff pounding on the doors, their voices muffled, desperate. But inside, time seemed to stretch, the room transforming. The threads wove intricate patterns across the walls, forming symbols that glowed with an inner luminescence, illuminating scenes from forgotten histories, ancient rituals and shadowed groves. Children sacrificed to appease unseen gods, cities crumbling under waves of madness. Mercer realized with horror that this wasn't just a possession. It was an invasion, the Weaver using Daniel to bridge worlds, feeding on the collective psyche of the asylum and beyond. Clutching the empty syringe like a talisman, Mercer forced herself to think. Science had failed her, but perhaps a blend of old and new could prevail. She recalled a passage from the occult tome about severing connections through symbolic acts, destroying the anchor. Mr. Thread, still in her pocket where she'd stuffed it after the failed burning, felt heavy, alive. Pulling it out, she saw its form shifting, the fabric undulating as if breathing. "This is your link," she shouted over the din, her voice cracking. Daniel, or whatever inhabited him, laughed, a sound that multiplied, filling the chapel with cacophony. "Foolish doctor, the rabbit is but a toy. The true anchor is deeper." The floor gave way further, a chasm opening beneath the altar, revealing a yawning void where dirt and stone should be. From the depths, more threads ascended, carrying with them glimpses of the Weaver's realm, a labyrinth of endless weaving where souls were spun into eternal tapestries of torment. Mercer teetered on the edge, her feet slipping on loose debris. In that precarious moment, a surge of adrenaline propelled her forward. She lunged for Daniel, grabbing his arm, pulling him away from the brink. The boy's skin was cold, unnaturally so, but as she dragged him, the threads hesitated as if confused by her defiance. "You're still a child," she whispered to him, hoping some remnant of Daniel remained. "Fight it!" The doors burst open then, splintered by the force of the staff outside, who had used a battering ram fashioned from a fallen beam. Nurse Grant led the charge, her face ashen but determined, followed by a handful of orderlies wielding whatever they could find: brooms, chairs, even a fire axe. They froze at the sight. The chapel in ruins, threads swirling like a storm. Mercer cradling Daniel amid the chaos. "Help me!" Mercer cried. Grant snapped into action, directing the others to form a chain, pulling Mercer and the boy to safety as the chasm widened, swallowing the altar whole. Threads lashed out, snagging an orderly's leg, dragging him screaming into the void before they could react. Escaping the chapel, the group barricaded the doors with pews and debris, the rumbling subsiding to an ominous quiver. The asylum corridors were a maze of destruction. Walls cracked, lights shattered, patients wandering in daze or huddled in corners murmuring incoherently. Mercer carried Daniel to the infirmary, his body slack, pulse faint. There, amid the clutter of overturned cots and scattered supplies, she administered an antidote to the sedative, hoping to rouse whatever humanity lingered. As his eyes opened clearer now, he whispered, "It's coming up." From the ground. Mercer nodded, understanding. The Weaver's true form was ascending, drawn by the disruption. Word of the catastrophe spread beyond the asylum walls. Police arrived, their badges glinting under the morning sun, cordoning off the building as reporters gathered at the gates, notebooks ready. Mercer, bandaged and exhausted, met with Inspector Harlan Crow, a grizzled detective with a reputation for handling the bizarre. In a makeshift command post in the garden, she recounted the events, omitting the supernatural elements at first, framing it as a structural collapse possibly triggered by old mining tunnels beneath the site. But Crow, sharp-eyed, noticed the symbols etched into her notepad. "I've seen these before," he said, his voice low. "In cold cases. Missing persons, madness outbreaks. Always around old burial grounds." Intrigued, Mercer shared more, and Crow revealed a hidden file from his briefcase. Reports from 1837, a century prior when Boston's underground was riddled with catacombs used during the Revolution. A cult had worshipped the Weaver, sacrificing children to summon prosperity. But it ended in a massacre, the site sealed. The asylum was built atop it unknowingly. Legends say the entity slumbers, awakening every 100 years, Crow explained. 1937 makes sense. Together, they pieced it. Daniel's family home was near an access point, his parents unwitting victims when they dug a new well, disturbing the slumber. Armed with this, Mercer and Crow planned a descent. Gathering lanterns, ropes, and what remained of the staff brave enough, they entered through the chapel chasm, now stabilized but emanating a cold draft. The tunnel below was a warren of earthen passages, walls veined with threads that pulsed like arteries. As they delved deeper, whispers assaulted them, personal secrets, fears manifested. One officer turned back, maddened. Another vanished in the dark. Mercer pressed on, Daniel's rabbit in hand, now a compass, warming as they neared the core. At the heart, they found it, a chamber vast as a cathedral, the Weaver enthroned amid a tapestry of writhing forms, lost souls including Thorne and the Weavers. The entity, a colossal mass of threads, turned its myriad eyes upon them. "Mortals," it boomed, "you weave your own doom." Threads lashed out, but Crow fired his revolver, severing some, buying time. Mercer, realizing the rabbit's role, hurled it into the mass, shouting words from the occult book, a banishing incantation. The Weaver shrieked, threads fraying, the chamber collapsing. They fled as the tunnels caved, emerging, gasping into daylight. The asylum shuddered one last time, then stilled. Daniel, left above under guard, awoke normal, his memories hazy, the darkness gone. But Mercer knew the Weaver wasn't destroyed, only repelled, slumbering again. As authorities covered it up as an earthquake, she wondered how long until the next cycle. The ground beneath the asylum settled with a final, reluctant sigh, the tremors fading into echoes that lingered in the bones of those who had survived. Dust hung in the air like a shroud, coating everything in a fine gray veil as emergency crews swarmed the site, their shouts cutting through the morning haze. Dr. Evelyn Mercer emerged from the chaos, her white coat torn and soiled, supporting Daniel Weaver's slight frame as he blinked against the sunlight, his face a mask of confusion rather than the eerie knowingness that had defined him. Inspector Harlan Crow directed the responders, his voice steady but his eyes betraying the horror of what they'd witnessed below. "Earthquake," he barked to the arriving officials. "Structural failure from old foundations." It was a lie they all clung to, a fragile barrier against the truth that threatened to unravel their sanity. In the hours that followed, the asylum was evacuated. Patients transferred to other facilities across Boston, their records hastily sealed with warnings of contagious delusion. Mercer watched as Daniel was placed in a waiting ambulance, his stuffed rabbit now inert, just a ragged toy clutched in his hands. "What now?" she asked Crow, her voice hoarse. He lit a cigarette, exhaling smoke that mingled with the dust. "We bury it. The boy goes into foster care, anonymous. You and I, we forget." But forgetting was impossible. That night, in a dingy motel on the city's edge, Mercer dreamed of threads burrowing through her skin, weaving patterns that spelled out warnings in a language she almost understood. Weeks turned to months, and Boston healed its visible wounds. The asylum was demolished, the site paved over for a new park as if concrete could seal away the darkness. Mercer returned to private practice, her once sterile office now cluttered with books on mythology and psychology, a fusion of worlds she could no longer separate. She tracked Daniel discreetly, through contacts in social services. Adopted by a childless couple in the suburbs, he seemed normal, attending school, making friends, his past a redacted file. But Mercer noticed anomalies in the reports. Teachers mentioning his drawings of spirals, classmates avoiding him after shared nightmares. "It's dormant," she wrote in her journal, "but not gone." One rainy afternoon in 1938, a year after the incident, Mercer received a visitor. Father Ignatius Riley, the priest she'd contacted in desperation, arrived unannounced, his black cassock dripping water onto her floor. His face was lined with concern, eyes sharp behind wire-rimmed glasses. "You stirred something ancient," he said without preamble, producing a sheaf of yellowed papers from his satchel. They were church records from the 1700s, detailing exorcisms in Boston's underbelly, catacombs where colonists had hidden from British troops, but also where darker rites occurred. "The Weaver," he explained, "is no demon, but an entity from the earth's veins feeding on human frailty. It chooses children because their minds are malleable, looms for its chaos." Together they pored over the documents, the rain pattering against the window like impatient fingers. Riley revealed that the symbols Daniel etched were wards, not curses, protections against the Weaver's full emergence. "Your actions repelled it, but the cycle persists. Every century it seeks a new vessel." Mercer shared her visions, the chamber below, the tapestry of souls. Riley nodded gravely. "We've fought it before. In 1837, a similar case, a girl in the mills, whispering prophecies that drove workers mad. The church sealed the site, but blood was spilled." He paused, his voice dropping. "The asylum was built atop that seal. Your earthquake cracked it open." Driven by this revelation, Mercer and Riley investigated further. They visited the park that now covered the asylum grounds, walking paths where flowers bloomed unnaturally vibrant, as if nourished by something below. At night, under cover of darkness, they dug shallow probes, finding threads, fine silk-like strands woven into the soil. "It's regrouping," Riley whispered as a thread twitched in his palm, dissolving into dust. Nearby residents reported strange occurrences, pets vanishing, children sleepwalking to the park's edge, humming unfamiliar tunes. One boy, Tommy Hale, age 8, was found digging in his yard, claiming the ground friend told him to. Mercer interviewed Tommy, her heart pounding as echoes of Daniel resurfaced. The boy spoke of a thread man in his dreams, promising secrets. "He says the city's full of holes," Tommy said, his eyes distant. Mercer recognized the signs, the Weaver probing for a new host. She and Riley devised a ritual, blending holy water with sedatives, symbols etched in salt circles. They performed it in Tommy's home, the family watching wide-eyed as the boy convulsed, then calmed. But as they left, Mercer felt a pull, a whisper in her mind. "You can't seal all the veins." The city itself seemed complicit. Boston's underground, a maze of tunnels, subways under construction, old aqueducts, became a breeding ground for rumors. Workers on the new MTA lines reported shadows moving against the lights, tools arranged in spirals. One crew unearthed a chamber, walls inscribed with symbols, bodies mummified in threads, remnants from past cycles. The find was hushed up, attributed to colonial graves, but Mercer knew better. She and Riley descended one night, lanterns casting flickering light on the horrors. "This is its domain," Riley said, tracing a symbol that glowed faintly. As they explored, threads ambushed them, coiling around Riley's legs, pulling him into a crevice. Mercer slashed with a knife, severing them, but Riley was injured. His ankle twisted, mind assaulted with visions. Escaping, they surfaced in an alley, gasping. Riley, pale, confessed, "It's stronger now, fed by the modern world. Depression, war looming. Human despair is its loom." Mercer realized the Weaver wasn't confined to children. It could influence anyone weakened. Cases piled up. A banker jumping from a bridge, muttering about unraveling fortunes. A mother smothering her infant. Claiming threads commanded her. Psychiatric wards overflowed. Doctors baffled by the epidemic of thread delusions. Determined, Mercer confronted Daniel, now 9, at his adoptive home. He answered the door, his face innocent, but his eyes held a shadow. "Dr. Mercer," he said, unsurprised. "Mr. Thread misses you." She shivered, producing a drawing from the tunnels. "Tell me how to stop it." Daniel smiled faintly. "You can't. It's part of us, the dark weave in every mind." As she left, he whispered, "But you can delay it. Bury the symbols deep." That night, Mercer and Riley rallied a small group, skeptical cops, enlightened clergy, to seal the city's veins. They mapped access points, performing rituals at each, etching wards into stone, pouring consecrated mixtures into the earth. At the park, the epicenter, they dug deep, uncovering a pulsing nexus of threads. As they chanted, the ground rebelled, quaking, threads lashing like whips. One man was taken, unraveled before their eyes. But they persisted, driving a silver stake, blessed and inscribed, into the heart. The nexus shrieked, imploding, the tremors ceasing. Dawn broke, the city quiet. Daniel, miles away, slept peacefully, his dreams his own. Mercer, exhausted, wondered if it was over. But as she bandaged wounds, a loose thread clung to her sleeve. A reminder. The Weaver slumbered, but its web spanned eternity. Waiting for the next fray. The silver stake quivered in the earth's grasp, embedded deep within the pulsating nexus of threads that had served as the Weaver's heart in the mortal realm. As the group retreated from the park's excavated pit, the ground sealed itself with an unnatural smoothness, soil knitting together like flesh over a wound. Dr. Evelyn Mercer stood at the edge, her hands caked in dirt and blood from minor lacerations, watching as the last tremors subsided into stillness. Father Ignatius Riley leaned on a shovel for support, his twisted ankle throbbing, but his eyes held a cautious relief. The small band of allies, 2 remaining cops and a clergyman, exchanged weary nods, their faces etched with the toll of the night's ordeal. The city around them stirred to life, oblivious to the battle waged beneath its streets, car horns blaring in the distance as the first commuters began their day. Mercer brushed the loose thread from her sleeve, but it clung stubbornly, dissolving only when she flicked it away with force. "Is it truly over?" one cop asked, his voice rough. Riley shook his head. "Sealed, perhaps. But entities like this, they endure." In the aftermath, Boston returned to its rhythms, the Great Depression's grip tightening, with breadlines snaking through the streets and factories humming with desperate labor. Mercer threw herself into her work, treating patients whose ailments seemed mundane compared to the cosmic horror she'd faced. Neuroses born of poverty, traumas from lost jobs. Yet shadows lingered in her practice. She found herself drawing symbols absent-mindedly during sessions, erasing them hastily when noticed. Her dreams were tapestries of threads, weaving scenarios where the Weaver whispered strategies for resurgence. "It's testing the seals," Riley warned during their monthly meetings in a quiet church basement surrounded by candles and ancient texts. "We must vigil." Daniel Weaver, now thriving in his adoptive home, became a focal point of their watch. At 10 years old, he excelled in school, his teachers praising his imagination in art class where he sketched intricate patterns. Harmless, they said, but Mercer saw echoes of the symbols. She visited under the guise of follow-up care, bringing candies and books. "Do you remember Mr. Thread?" she asked once casually. Daniel paused, his brow furrowing. "He was a friend, but he's quiet now." The rabbit sat on his shelf mended by his new mother, its eyes dull buttons. Yet Mercer noticed how Daniel's fingers twitched when near it, as if pulling invisible strings. As 1939 dawned, with war clouds gathering over Europe, fractures began to appear in the fabric of their victory. Reports trickled in from the city's underbelly. Subway workers hearing whispers in the tunnels, emerging disoriented with threads tangled in their hair. A construction site for a new skyscraper unearthed a chamber, similar to the one Mercer had explored, filled with desiccated remains wrapped in fibrous cocoons. The foreman, a burly Irishman named O'Malley, contacted Crow after finding the inspector's name in old police logs. The walls, they moved, O'Malley stammered in a smoky bar where they met. Mercer, accompanying Crow, examined photos he smuggled out, symbols glowing faintly in the flash. "It's probing," she confirmed, her stomach nodding. Riley's research deepened, uncovering global parallels. In letters from colleagues abroad, he learned of similar entities. In London's underground, a spinner blamed for blackouts during the Blitz preparations. In Tokyo's subways, a kami of strings linked to earthquakes. "It's not unique to Boston," Riley said, spreading maps across a table. "A network perhaps connected through the Earth's ley lines." Mercer traced lines on the map, noting how Boston's veins intersected with ancient Native American burial mounds and colonial graveyards. "We sealed the heart, but the arteries remain." One night, a storm lashed the city, lightning illuminating the skyline like accusatory fingers. Mercer was jolted awake by a phone call from Daniel's adoptive parents. "He's gone," the mother sobbed. Vanished from his room. Rushing over, Mercer found the window open, rain pooling on the sill and on the bed, a single thread, coiled into a symbol. Panic surged. The Weaver was reclaiming its vessel. With Riley and Crow, they tracked clues, footprints leading to the park, now lush with overgrown grass hiding the sealed pit. There, under the downpour, they found Daniel standing motionless, eyes glazed, hands digging furiously. "It's calling," he murmured as they approached. Threads emerged from the ground, slender at first, then thickening, wrapping around his ankles. The group sprang into action. Riley chanted Latin verses, sprinkling holy water that sizzled on contact with the threads. Crow fired shots into the earth, disrupting the emergence. Mercer grabbed Daniel, pulling him free, but a thread lashed her arm. Injecting visions, the Weaver, wounded but healing, drawing strength from global unrest. The Spanish Civil War's atrocities, Hitler's rising shadow fueling its weave. Humanity's despair is its thread, it mocked in her mind. She severed the connection with a knife blessed by Riley, the pain grounding her. They retreated to the church, Daniel sedated in a back room. "We need a permanent ward," Riley declared. Over days they crafted one. A ritual combining science and faith. Electrodes to disrupt neural patterns. Incantations to bind the spirit. Performed under the altar, with Daniel strapped down, the air crackled with energy. Threads manifested, fighting back, coiling around fixtures, shattering stained glass. A cop was ensnared, his screams echoing as he unraveled into dust. But they persisted, Mercer activating the machine as Riley intoned the final words. A burst of light filled the space, threads incinerating in sparks. Daniel awoke truly free. His memories of the entity faded to nightmares. The city quieted, incidents ceasing. But Mercer, scarred on her arm where the thread had struck, a faint spiraling mark, knew vigilance was eternal. She established a secret society with Riley and Crow, monitoring for signs, training successors. As World War II erupted, bringing new horrors, she wondered if the Weaver thrived on such chaos waiting in the wings. Years passed, the 1940s blending into the 1950s, Boston evolving with post-war booms. Daniel grew into a young man, studying architecture, his designs incorporating protective symbols subconsciously. Mercer, aging but resolute, received a letter one day, an anonymous tip about a child in New York exhibiting similar symptoms. "The web extends," she sighed, packing her bag. The cycle, delayed, persisted, fractures mending, only to crack anew in the endless fabric of existence. The faint scar on Dr. Evelyn Mercer's arm itched like a buried memory as she boarded the train to New York in the crisp autumn of 1952. The locomotive's whistle, a mournful cry that blended with the city's fading roar behind her. At 52, her hair streaked with silver, she carried a worn leather satchel stuffed with maps, ritual tools, and the ever-present journal where she chronicled the weaver's insidious patterns. The letter that summoned her was anonymous, postmarked from a Brooklyn precinct, its words clipped and urgent. Child, 8 years, symbols on walls, dreams of threads. Asylum won't touch it. Help. It was the echo she'd dreaded, the cycle's relentless spin, now reaching beyond Boston's shadowed veins into the wider web of America's undercurrents. As the train rattled northward, Mercer gazed at the passing landscape, industrial sprawl giving way to rural voids, and felt the pull, that familiar tug in her gut, as if the earth itself whispered invitations to descend. New York was a beast of concrete and ambition, its skyline a jagged crown piercing the smog-choked sky. Mercer arrived at Bellevue Hospital under the guise of a consulting psychiatrist, her credentials from Harvard still carrying weight despite the years. The case file waited in a locked drawer. Little Elias Grant, orphaned after a tenement fire, now exhibiting behaviors that chilled the staff. He hummed discordant melodies in his sleep, scratched spirals into his bedsheets, and spoke of the spinner below, who promised to weave his family back together. The nurses avoided his room, crossing themselves furtively. One had already resigned, babbling about shadows that unraveled her stockings at night. Mercer met him in the dim ward, the boy's eyes locking onto hers with unnerving precision. "You smell like old dirt," Elias said softly, his voice carrying the weight of someone far older. Like the lady who fought the threads, the admission sent a shiver through her. How could he know? She probed gently, her questions laced with the subtle wards she'd learned from Riley. Now bedridden in Boston, his health failing from the toll of their secret war. Elias drew for her on a crayon-smeared page, a map of the city, tunnels marked in red converging on his family's burned-out building. "It's waking again," he whispered. "The war fed it, all that dying, all that hiding. Now it wants more." Mercer recognized the signs. World War II's global carnage had been a feast, despair threading through trenches and bombed cities, strengthening the entity. Post-war prosperity masked the rot. But in places like New York's slums, where dreams curdled into nightmares, the Weaver found fertile ground. Teaming with a local ally, a skeptical detective named Rosa Klein, who had lost her partner to a suicide involving self-inflicted thread-like cuts, Mercer delved into the city's underbelly. They navigated the subway's labyrinthine bowels where workers whispered of apparitions in the work lights, figures of twine and shadow, pulling at loose bricks. One night in an abandoned station sealed since the 1920s, they found a nest, threads woven into a cradle, cradling a mummified infant from some forgotten ritual. Klein's flashlight beam trembled as it illuminated symbols pulsing with faint light. "This ain't science," she muttered, her Brooklyn accent thick with unease. Mercer nodded, reciting a binding verse from Riley's translations, the air thickening as threads recoiled, snapping like whips. Back at Bellevue, Elias's condition worsened. Patients in adjacent beds began mirroring him, humming, scratching, eyes glazing over with shared visions. The ward became a symphony of unease, the air humming with latent energy. Mercer administered a cocktail she'd refined over years, barbiturates laced with herbal essences from occult lore, designed to sever neural pathways the Weaver exploited. But as she injected Elias, he convulsed, his small body arching, threads manifesting visibly, fine filaments bursting from his pores, weaving toward her. "Join the pattern," a chorus of voices echoed, not Elias's but layered, ancient. Klein burst in, fire axe from the hall swinging, severing the strands mid-air. They dissipated in acrid smoke, but Elias slumped, his breathing shallow, the entity's grip loosening but not broken, desperate. Mercer contacted the network they'd built, a loose cadre of wardens across the East Coast, priests, shrinks, cops who'd seen too much. 3 converged on New York, a Philadelphia rabbi versed in Kabbalistic seals, a DC analyst from the nascent CIA sniffing Cold War occult threats, and a folk healer from the Appalachians with rootwork charms. In Bellevue's basement morgue, under the hum of fluorescent lights, they performed the rite. Elias was the center, bound in a circle of salt and silver wire, symbols etched in chalk around him. Candles flickered, casting shadows that danced like conspirators. The rabbi chanted Hebrew invocations. The healer burned sage bundles that filled the air with cloying smoke. while the analyst monitored with a jury-rigged EEG, spikes confirming the entity's neural interference. As midnight tolled, the Weaver struck back. The ground quaked, cracks spidering across the concrete floor, exhaling cold drafts laced with the scent of loam and decay. Threads erupted, thick as ropes, lashing out, ensnaring the rabbi's arm, pulling him into a vision of unraveling Torah scrolls, coiling around the healer's throat, whispering curses in forgotten dialects. Klein fired her service revolver, bullets passing harmlessly through the ethereal forms. But Mercer hurled a vial of consecrated acid, a brew of lye and holy water, that sizzled on contact, fraying the assault. The analyst screamed as threads invaded the EEG machine, wires twisting into nooses. Elias thrashed, his voice booming. "The weave is eternal. You delay the inevitable." Mercer, drawing on the scar's latent pain as anchor, plunged a silver needle, Riley's last gift, into Elias's palm, channeling the banishment. Light exploded, threads shrieking as they incinerated the circle holding against the onslaught. The entity retreated, a final whisper echoing. The boy in Boston was first, but the cycle spins on. Elias collapsed free, his eyes clearing to innocent confusion. The group collapsed in exhaustion, bonds forged in the crucible of survival. But victory was Pyrrhic. News from Boston arrived by wire. Riley had passed in his sleep, a spiral carved into his bedsheet, threads under his nails. "It knew," Mercer murmured, grief sharpening her resolve. She buried him under a ward-etched stone, vowing to carry the vigil alone if needed. Elias was placed with a warden family, his gifts monitored, turned to good, drawing protective sigils for the network. Klein joined the fold, her cynicism cracked, trading badge for shadow work. As the 1950s wore on, McCarthy's witch hunts mirrored their own secret war, paranoia threading through society. Mercer aged into the 1960s, her network expanding amid civil rights marches and counterculture blooms, where the Weaver sought vessels in the disillusioned young. One case in Haight-Ashbury, a hippie girl channeling apocalyptic visions, nearly broke them, threads weaving through protest crowds, inciting riots. They sealed it in Golden Gate's fog-shrouded tunnels, but losses mounted. The analyst, driven mad, institutionalized. The healer vanished into the woods. By 1970, Mercer, frail but fierce, mentored Daniel, now a professor of folklore, unknowingly weaving wards into his lectures. "The human mind is the true loom," he told her once, eyes twinkling with half-remembered shadows. "We create the monsters we fear." She smiled, hiding the thread she'd plucked from his collar that morning. The Weaver slumbered, but its echoes persisted, in Vietnam's jungles where soldiers reported phantom wires in the vines. In Watergate's scandals, whispers pulling strings from the dark. In her final years, Mercer penned a codex, hidden in plain sight as a psychiatric treatise, The Undiagnosable Threads of the Psyche. It circulated among wardens, a Bible for the unseen fight. As she lay dying in 1975, threads coiling faintly at her bedside, she whispered to the empty room, "Not yet." The scar on her arm glowed one last time, a beacon against the encroaching night. Daniel found her peaceful, the codex clutched in her hands, ready to spin the tale onward. The cycle, eternal, waited below, threads humming in anticipation of the next unraveling. As the pages of Dr. Evelyn Mercer's codex turned yellow with the passage of time, hidden away in the archives of those who inherited her unyielding quest, the story of Daniel Weaver, and the countless vessels like him, faded into the realm of whispered legends. Yet the Weaver's influence, though subdued, never truly vanished. It lingered in the quiet corners of the human psyche, a subtle pull that manifested in unexplained breakdowns, in artists' manic inspirations that bordered on madness, and in the sudden, inexplicable urges that drove ordinary people to acts they could scarcely comprehend. Daniel himself, growing into old age by the turn of the millennium, became a reclusive scholar, his books on folklore laced with veiled warnings about the unseen spinners that shaped destiny. He never fully remembered the darkness that had claimed him as a child. But in his final days, as the 2000s dawned with new fears of terrorism and digital disconnection, he would stare at the ground, murmuring about threads that connected us all, binding humanity in a web of shared fragility. Mercer's legacy, passed through the network of wardens, evolved with the times, rituals adapted to technology, symbols encoded in algorithms, vigils held in online forums where anonymous seekers shared tales of encounters with the inexplicable. The entity, patient as the earth itself, slumbered deeper now, its cycles stretched by the efforts of those who fought in the shadows, but always inevitably, probing for weaknesses in the seals, waiting for the next era of unrest to unravel the barriers once more. The true horror of Daniel's case wasn't the violence or the supernatural incursions. It was the revelation that the human mind is not an isolated fortress, but a porous vessel, susceptible to forces beyond our comprehension. Science, with its diagnoses and treatments, could label symptoms, schizophrenia, dissociative identity disorder, collective hysteria, but it faltered at the threshold of the truly undiagnosable, where the boundaries between psychology and the primordial blurred. What if the Weaver wasn't an external monster, but a manifestation of our collective unconscious, a dark archetype woven from humanity's oldest fears, abandonment, loss of control, the terror of the unknown lurking beneath the surface of reality? Daniel's story forces us to confront the fragility of our sanity, how a single thread, be it trauma, belief, or something more arcane, can pull everything apart. In reflecting on this, we see that justice isn't always served in courtrooms or asylums. Sometimes it's a quiet battle fought in the recesses of the soul, where truth emerges not as a cure, but as an uneasy truce with the darkness that resides in us all. This psychiatric enigma reminds us that safety is an illusion, a thin veil over the chaos that science strives to contain, but can never fully eradicate. The human mind, for all its wonders, harbors tunnels leading to abysses we dare not explore, lest we find something staring back that changes us forever. And you, dear viewer, have journeyed through this labyrinth to its very end. Congratulations, you've proven yourself among the rare few who possess the courage to gaze into the void without flinching. Not everyone can withstand the weight of such truths. Many would turn away at the first whisper of threads in the dark. But you've delved into the heart of the mystery, emerging with eyes wide open to the hidden layers of our world. You are part of an elite circle, those who dare to know the whole unvarnished reality behind the facade of normalcy. Your perseverance marks you as a true seeker, one who understands that knowledge like this isn't just information, it's a transformation, a sharpening of the senses to the subtle horrors that lurk in everyday shadows. Now, to solidify your place in this shadowed fellowship, I invite you to leave a comment below with the phrase, "This story unraveled my perception of the human mind." By sharing these words, you'll signal to other committed followers that you're one of us, a guardian against the unseen, a decoder of the enigmatic. Your comment will weave you into our growing community, a network of minds united in the pursuit of truths that society buries deep. Together we build a tapestry of awareness, stronger for each voice that joins, helping to illuminate the paths others fear to tread. Imagine the impact. Your words could draw another soul into this circle, expanding our collective vigilance against the forces that seek to unravel us. But don't stop there. The importance of sharing this video cannot be overstated. In a world where secrets like Daniel's are suppressed, forgotten in dusty files or dismissed as folklore, spreading this tale is an act of defiance. Share it with those you trust, those who sense the cracks in reality but lack the words to name them. Let it ripple outward, like threads extending from a central weave, pulling more eyes to the truths no one dares to voice. By sharing, you become a conduit, ensuring that the lessons of this psychiatric nightmare reach ears that need them, preventing the Weaver, or whatever name you give the darkness, from catching the unwary off guard. To truly anchor yourself in this quest, hit that subscribe button. Think of it as tying a knot in the fabric of fate, securing your place in a unique community that thrives on deciphering the inexplicable. Without subscription, you risk drifting away, the threads of curiosity fraying in the winds of daily distraction. But by subscribing, you weave yourself into our unbreakable net, where every notification is a summons to explore more depths, more enigmas, more revelations that challenge the boundaries of the mind. It's like stepping into a hidden chamber where the walls whisper secrets only the initiated can hear. A sanctuary for those haunted by the strange, where we collectively stare down the monsters that science can't diagnose. And please continue watching our videos. Keep that flame of curiosity burning bright against the encroaching night of ignorance. Each story we uncover is a lantern in the dark, guiding you through the bizarre, the sinister, the profoundly disturbing. Your ongoing presence fuels this exploration, ensuring that the enigmatic remains alive, probed, and understood. Together we'll keep unraveling the mysteries that bind us, one thread at a time. In the end, Daniel Weaver's legacy isn't one of horror alone, but a cautionary echo. The mind is a delicate weave, and what lies beneath could emerge at any moment. Stay vigilant, stay connected, and remember, the truth is out there waiting in the ground, ready to pull you in if you're not prepared. Thank you for being here. Your journey has only just begun.